Welcome to Two Beans in a Pod.
Great to be here.
People tune in because they want to get past the headlines, really understand the important stuff quickly.
Exactly. And today, we're doing just that, diving into Ray Dalio's recent warnings.
Right, Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, the guy who, has a pretty solid track record predicting economic shifts. He called the 2008 crisis, didn't he?
He certainly did. And lately, he's been pretty vocal. We've seen him on NBC's Meet the Press, Fox Business, CNBC, Bloomberg, even YouTube with NBC News.
All talking about President Trump's tariffs.
Yep, primarily his concerns about them. So our mission today is really to unpack what he's worried about, the potential impacts he sees, and, the bigger picture he's painting.
Okay, let's dig in. So, Dalio, he's not just looking at these tariffs in isolation, is he? It sounds like he sees them as part of something bigger.
That's exactly right. For him, the tariffs aren't the root problem. They're more like a symptom, a sign of these larger imbalances brewing under the surface.
Imbalances, like what specifically? He talks about these big forces driving history, I think.
Yeah, he has this framework, 5 big forces. The money, credit, and debt cycle, that's a huge one for him. Then internal political conflict, the international world order, acts of nature, and of course, technology.
Okay.
And his point is that right now, the pressures within these areas, especially debt and conflict, both internal and international, they've reached a point where the current situation just isn't sustainable anymore.
So the tariffs are kind of emerging because of these existing strains.
Precisely. They're happening within this already stressed environment. It's not a stable backdrop.
Got it. Now, what about the stated goals of the tariffs? Boosting tax revenue, trying to reshore manufacturing, bring jobs back.
Dalio acknowledges those aims. He gets the why, you could say. But his real worry is about the how, the way they've been rolled out. He's described Trump's approach as very disruptive.
Disruptive, how so?
He used this analogy like throwing rocks into the production system. It gives you a sense of the chaos, the unpredictability it introduces.
Throwing rocks, yeah, that paints a picture. And we've definitely seen that play out, haven't we? The uncertainty for businesses, the jitters in the global markets.
Absolutely. That suddenness, the scale of it, it definitely sent ripples, maybe even waves through global markets. Remember the specifics? That 90-day pause on some reciprocal tariffs, but not for China.
Right. China got hit harder. Tariffs jumping up to, 145% minimum.
At least 145%, yeah. And then there was that sort of temporary carve-out for some electronics, smartphones, monitors. But even they weren't fully exempt, still facing a 20% tariff.
It just feels like a moving target. And that constant shifting, that unpredictability itself must be a major problem for planning, for investment.
Exactly. That instability is central to Dalio's concern. And he links this disruption, this tariff approach, back to those bigger systemic issues we talked about.
And this leads him to think the U.S. is at a critical point.
Yes, he used the phrase decision-making point. And he was pretty blunt on Meet the Press, saying he thinks the U.S. is very close to a recession.
Close to a recession. But I got the sense his worries go even deeper than just a standard downturn. He hinted at something worse.
He did. He talks about the potential for a breaking down of the monetary order, big changes in how things work domestically and internationally.
Breaking down the monetary order. What does that really mean?
Well, think about the system set up after World War II, the dollar's role, the global trade structures. He's suggesting that foundation could be fundamentally changing. And he draws this pretty concerning parallel.
The 1930s.
The 1930s, yeah. He points out that history shows similar patterns when conditions become unsustainable. Things like high debt levels, trade friction, think Smoot-Hawley tariffs back then, and a rising power challenging the established one.
It's not just about the events matching up, but maybe the policy responses too. Are we making similar mistakes?
That seems to be his underlying question, yes. Are we learning from history, or are we potentially repeating some of those dangerous dynamics? It's a sobering comparison, especially coming from him.
Definitely. And speaking of unsustainable conditions, debt keeps coming up. That seems like a huge piece of this puzzle for Dalio.
Oh, absolutely. He's very focused on the U.S. budget deficit, very concerned. He points to projections. I think he said it could hit around 7% of GDP if policies don't change course.
7%. Wow. And he has a target in mind.
Yeah, he's called on Congress to really bring that down, aiming for something like 3% of GDP. He sees that as a crucial step towards stability.
Why is that 3% number so important? What's the risk if we don't get there?
Well, his fear is what he calls a supply-demand problem for debt. Basically, if the government keeps needing to borrow more and more money, issuing loads of bonds, but there aren't enough buyers or investors demand higher returns to take on that debt, well, interest rates have to go up.
Which makes borrowing more expensive for everyone, right? Government, businesses, us.
Exactly. It can create this nasty feedback loop, making the fiscal situation even harder to manage. And tariffs, if they slow down the economy, could actually make the debt picture worse by reducing tax revenue.
So it all connects. Tariffs, debt, potential recession. It's a tangled web.
Very much so.
Now, if things don't change, if these trends just keep going,
Yeah.
what's the worst-case scenario Dalio talks about? It sounded pretty extreme.
It is quite alarming. He specifically warns about a decline in the value of money. Think serious inflation or loss of confidence in the currencies.
Okay.
He also mentions heightened internal conflict, maybe beyond the usual political disagreements we see in a democracy, and then international conflict, potentially severe disruptions to the global economy, even raising the specter of military conflict.
Military conflict.
Yeah.
Wow. So he's really talking about the potential collapse of the whole post-war order.
That seems to be the implication, the potential unraveling of that monetary and geopolitical system that's been in place more or less since 1945. It's a profound warning.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is: finance, politics, international relations. But he's not just doom and gloom, right? Does he offer any way out, any preferred path?
He does. He's not just diagnosing the problem, he suggests treatments, so to speak. A key one is urging the U.S. to negotiate what he calls a win-win trade deal with China.
A win-win.
Yeah.
What would that look like?
He specifically mentioned needing the Chinese yuan to appreciate against the dollar as part of that balance. But underlying it all is his belief that both countries, the U.S. and China, absolutely have to get their own growing debt situations under control.
Interesting. So cooperation, not just confrontation.
That seems to be his preference.
And it's also interesting, while he's very critical of the way tariffs are being used, he doesn't necessarily disagree that U.S. manufacturing needs attention, does he?
That's a really important distinction. He acknowledges the underlying problem that the U.S. perhaps doesn't make enough of its own stuff, relies too heavily on imports, especially from China. He gets that part of the argument. But his concern is about the practicality of fixing that quickly through tariffs. Can we realistically reshore massive amounts of manufacturing rapidly, given, workforce skills, existing global supply chains, all that infrastructure?
Right. It's not like flipping a switch.
Exactly. He sees it as a complex, maybe decades-long challenge, not something tariffs can just magically solve overnight, especially disruptive ones.
Okay, this gives us a much clearer picture of Dalio's thinking. It's complex, it's interconnected. He's definitely seeing these tariffs as a flashpoint for much larger historical forces at play.
Absolutely.
And look, if you're finding this deep dive insightful, if you want to stay ahead on these crucial economic analyses, please do hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out.
Yeah, it does. And what's really striking about Dalio's perspective is how he weaves it all together, isn't it? Trade, debt, domestic politics, global order, it's all linked. It really hammers home how interconnected our world is now.
That interconnectedness is definitely the thread running through it all. And the historical parallels he draws, they add a lot of weight, don't they? Reminds you these aren't totally unprecedented pressures.
Right, there are lessons there, potentially. It does make you wonder, though, looking at his framework. What do you think are the most likely immediate impacts we might see from these tariff policies continuing as they are?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, the uncertainty alone seems damaging. But Dalio, despite outlining these serious risks, he does suggest it's not necessarily inevitable, right? These worst-case scenarios aren't guaranteed.
No, definitely not guaranteed. He emphasizes that there are paths forward. He believes these risks are potentially avoidable, or at least manageable.
Through what? Better policy.
Yes, through thoughtful policy decisions. That means things like getting serious about fiscal responsibility, managing the deficit like we discussed, but also, crucially, international cooperation. Working with other nations, especially China, rather than just confrontationally.
So, smart domestic policy combined with smarter foreign policy, essentially.
That seems to be the core of his prescription for navigating these very uncertain waters and avoiding those really severe outcomes he's warning about.
Well, this has been incredibly illuminating. Thank you for breaking that down.
My pleasure. It's important stuff to track.
Thank you for listening to Two Beans in a Pod. If you are interested in Ray Dalio's upcoming book, please pre-order it from the link below.